Good afternoon. It's nothing being the guy who's fascinated with the comp discussion and forgetting to get mic'd up before you're up. So, my takeaway from that last speech was that I am really happy how much McKinsey pays in cash. So, just throwing it out there. Okay. For those of you tweeting, let's not. Huh? I guess I'm maybe a little unusual for what I'm coming here. I guess most of my stuff here will be what we're seeing in our clients and in the broader market of why do some companies seem to be continuing to perform well and some not, and maybe some of the stuff that's coming in the way of automation, which is pretty interesting stuff from the Global Institute. I've written a few things on that recently. But ideally, hopefully, wrapping it back to what you do, which is how can we pick better? Right, and I was just at HR Tech World last week or the week before, I forget. And the bulk of that, even if you're looking at the software, the amount of time was, by and large, different versions of selection, right? Whether it was just, old school, really understanding the knowledge, skills, abilities, attributes, that kind of stuff, or whether it was software or different techniques or gamification, which I currently have an internal group at McKinsey flogging me about abandoning our analytics test and going to gamification. But it just feels to me like I'm handing over a PlayStation controller and seeing whether or not they're clever. So, but then again, there we go. Okay, so quick background on me, and I promise I will be unlike any person from McKinsey you've ever met. I'm from about 90 miles west of here in Pennsylvania, a place called the Lehigh Valley. And is there a little plug for the PA? Yeah, there we go. Well done. I promise this is not shtick. My first job was as a bouncer. And it's all true. It was to help people change their behavior very quickly. And then I worked at a place called Kids Peace, which is it's a residential psychiatric treatment company. I ran a unit there. I did that right after undergraduate. I can't imagine why they gave me a unit, but they did. So I had 20 to 25 bed unit of kids who were court placed. And that was pretty amazing from a mission standpoint, and it was psychology, right? It was why people behave the way they do. I was getting a little tired of getting attacked at work every day, so I went back to grad school, got an MBA at night. Nothing great, just in Moravian, where I graduated from, because we were passionate about the business, but kind of terrible at running it. And then I decided I wanted to do org psych, because I could explain why people behave the way they do, but not get attacked. So I stopped working, went to Auburn, got a second master's in HR, PhD in management, and I thought I was going to be an academic. So I did one track HR, one track organizational analysis and change, and fell in love with cool math on putting numbers to why people behave the way they do. That all was going really well. I thought I was going to come home to teach. Had an offer at St. Joe's. A few other places thought that would be great, but I didn't like being discounted because I was ABD. So I decided I was going to stay at Auburn. 2 weeks later, I got a random email from folks at McKinsey, but McKinsey in London. And our normal recruiting process, for those of you that know us, it is glacial. It goes a year in advance, and I did about a 6-week whirlwind, 2 trips to London, get interviewed, and got hired that spring. So that was spring of 2000. So how does that get in any way to this? The bulk of the work that I'm going to talk about started early 2001. So I joined in London in August of 2000. And we had about 4 months of the halcyon days of the dot-com era. And you remember if you put E- in front of anything, it was thought of to be cool and better. E-H. That was the time when Exchanging and Exalt were buying up HR functions, using them as the base for shared services and outsourcing and viewing that as a model, right? It was an interesting time. I mean, the math involved in multiples on company losing money is still something I don't quite get, but I'm told it exists. It's okay to laugh, honestly, okay? From where I came from, I had friends' parents who thought they were millionaires because they worked at Lucent. Right? Yeah, right? And, some of them are still working, right? So anyway, so there we are in 2000, and the bottom falls out, right? I was, actually, can I say this? Yeah, I think it was in the court papers. I was serving Marconi when it lost 99% of its value, right? And there was a lot of companies like that, right, that just went away. So, we at McKinsey, and I tend to think, the fellow who was up here notwithstanding about the smartest 29-year-olds on the planet being at Google, I would tend to disagree, but okay. I think we have them, but all right. And I was that age when I joined, so there you go. But, so we said, hey, what are we getting wrong? How is it that we went from writing, talking about people being great and calling them, and just now they're gone? So we launched what to this day is still going, and we think is the largest piece of research on what makes companies great and why do they perform. And that started in 2001, okay? And just 2 more plugs for you to pay attention to. In the late 90s, we wrote 2 books, quite notable, one called War for Talent, right, and one called Creative Destruction. Now, War for Talent was pretty straightforward. That was about A talent, stuff that you all play in all the time. Creative Destruction was the Schumpeter stuff, right, which was cannibalize your capital, reallocate it, look where the values are, don't be slow in shutting things down. The lead case in both those books, published by us, Enron. Right? So there you go. So that worked out really well. Then we said, well, look, okay, well, that was a little goofy, and they kind of took pieces of our talent system, but then had it highly incentivized. That really wasn't on us. Then we rolled back the clock, and we said, well, let's look at that first book written by Peters and Waterman, right? So In Search of Excellence, arguably created the market for modern management text. One of the cases, you couldn't call it the lead case, but one of the cases of the companies really well profiled was Atari. And 6 months after the book came out, they were burying games in the desert. So what's the big takeaway? The first one is, at no point should you ever agree to be a case in one of our books, right? Ever. It's really working out poorly. But the second part was, we recognized a really big flaw in what we were looking at, and we got seduced, much like the writers at Forbes or Fortune or the Journal or the FT or anyone else, with flashes in the pan, right? Folks who could string together, 5, 6, 7, 8 quarters and get seduced by that. And so we said, well, let's really take a look at what excellence really looks like. And then we went and grabbed the original Collins and Porras list of companies from their first book, when Collins was still writing with Porras, and our list from In Search of Excellence. And let's say there was 51 companies for round numbers because it's convenient. 17 went away, 17 were struggling, 17 were still doing great. And we looked at the difference between the ones that went away and the ones that were doing great. The ones that were doing great systematically, both in their systems and their processes and the ethos of the people who were running the place, paid attention to both making money today and tomorrow, as well as how they ran the place. So now through the rest of what I'm going to talk about, you're going to hear me talking about things like organizational health or culture, or in plain language, how they run the place. But this how they run the place thing, right, matters a lot, right? And so we set about putting numbers to that. How could we measure how you ran the place and how that made a difference, both near term and long term? And for those of you being paid out and or encouraging people to take jobs, being paid out on the long term, that might be valuable, right? By our math, places that are well run contribute 3 times more than places that are not. Whether it's a shareholder return or an in-year kind of profit kind of thing where you can size adjust it. It's pretty dramatic. So the rest of this will be, how do we actually bring some life to health or how you run the place, right? What's ways in which you can run the place differently, and then ultimately how you pick it. So all that makes sense. Okay, and I don't have a clock here. Normally I have a minder telling me when I'm going. All right, about 40 minutes? Yeah, okay. Or that really large one in the back, right? I'll tell you, I'm batting 1,000 today. No mic and ignoring the red clock. Next time, jump up and down, all right? We're good. Okay. So I'm not going to force you to go through too many slides. One of these is the obligatory McKinsey advertisements, and I really dislike those, so we're going to skip them. Even though we are paying someone to make them, we're going to fix that. Okay. This is the obligatory I'm not making it up chart, okay? So we wrote an instrument there. Remember, now go back to 2001. We turned this thing on. Our colleagues said, hey, it's great that you came up with this idea that the companies, this was case-based, obviously, companies that are still around manage for performance and health, how much is it worth? So we had to write an instrument. A colleague and I, who now, unfortunately, is a partner at BCG in Australia. I still talk to him occasionally, not too much though. He and I wrote the instrument, and it's now the most widely used tool in the firm. Do we have the updated numbers here? It's about 3 million respondents. Around 1,300. It's now about 1,500 companies, about 2,000 discrete units. So we feel pretty good that the claims we're making is based on a nice broad range of companies represented by the firm's clients, right? So they tend to be of the mid to large size across all sectors. We might be a little over-indexed in banking, finance, insurance, but not too much. Okay, do they make more money? And the short answer is absolutely they do. Right, this is just, if you're top quartile in health versus bottom quartile, you make a lot more money. You return a lot more to the shareholders. This holds in the long term. When we did this one, we did it over a 9-year run because we were a little worried that some of the companies we were serving would do better on the run up or on the run down. So we did it through cycle as well as within a particular year. I have colleagues, particularly they tend to be German, who had a hard time getting their head around the fact that things like culture and how you run the place mattered at all. Believe it or not. I mean, we built an entire practice on AVAs, right? And so, you know, there you go. So we also tested, if you took the instrument in year 0, we said, all right, well, let's just look. What was financial performance 2 years before, 1 year before, the same year, a year after, and 2 years after? Basically, the way the arrow went would tell you which one it was, broadly. And the strongest relationship was the year you measured how you run the place, started doing something about it, and a year later. So is it completely causal? Of course not. Do I have 3 million respondents in a completely causal database? No. Am I an academic? No, I'm not. I'm a consultant trying to help people make more money. But it seems pretty compelling. Okay, so now how does this matter in any way to what we're talking about here? Because for your clients and my clients, who in many cases are the same, unless, of course, many of you, and I recognize these names, by the way, as a quick aside, never having spoken to you before, and Richard should have warned me of this, the number of companies here who are absolutely capable of getting a hold of me at a moment's notice and or unbelievably knowing almost to the dollar how much I made last year is remarkable. So well done to those of you that have great moles inside McKinsey, because it is spectacular. Okay, back to the regular program. So this one here, this just says, when you're seeking out information on how a company is performing, sometimes it's best to look within unit, not just across, and get a sense of why is someone who runs a branch or a division, or in this case, this was refineries. One of my clients is a really large global oil company. And this was just looking at the ones that were run better versus how much money they make. For those of you that work in energy, you know they have this something called Solomon, and it lets you put things on a dollar per barrel basis. And there's this amazing relationship between those that are healthier and their dollar per barrel performance. Right? And this time, that was 2004. 7 years later, when they had updated Solomon again, it was still the best predictor. Right? And so what does that mean? This culture stuff is the gift that keeps on giving. Right? When you bake it in, we have a clear recipe for how we run it. It sticks, even beyond the leader. Now, why is that interesting for you all? Because you're picking leaders. There is something here around when you go to a place that doesn't have a recipe. You can park somebody in there, and if they're good at creating a recipe, it's going to have an annuity effect. If you're sending someone into a place where they had somebody who had a really clear recipe, that's not going to be particularly easy for them to change overnight. They should know that going in advance. And when I was kind of reflecting on the comments I wanted to bring to you, part of it was you picking better. The other part was actually giving the candidate a better sniff of what they're getting into. Right? Now, and maybe a third corollary here is I've been hit up recently by a lot of private equity firms trying to get a handle on health pre-buy. Right? Now, in some cases, like the Thai Stock Exchange just started using what's called the Organizational Health Index. It's our tool, whatever. Using that. We've had what we call mega OHI. So I think Korea is doing it. And there's a banking standards for a European country using it. That's a little on the wraps right now. But the point is, they're trying to say, with a long-term view of investment, we want to start getting a measure on how the place is run. And increasingly, private equity is looking to use it pre-buy and then definitely post-buy as part of the strategy process for saying, we'd like to know how you're going to make money. We'd also like to know how you're not going to run the thing into the ground. Because in some cases, think about it, the days of just making money off the financial engineering, pretty limited. Right? Most people have decent enough CFOs, treasurers, controllers who can do a lot of this, right? So let's just say you happen to stumble across a company that has a terrible finance function and it doesn't go to auction. Okay, great, but that's like finding a unicorn, right? Most have reworked that out, right? So it does come down to, can you figure out how they're running it? What can you do with it? Okay, so when we measure this, we try to get a handle on, their health and how is it working. We give you a score. The beauty of these one number things, by the way, how many here have had children in the United States or Western Europe? Okay, what's the first number you hear about your child? The APGAR score? How useful is that? Like 0? other than all you know is you desperately want it to be higher. You have no idea what it actually means unless you are a medical professional. Our overall health score is a little bit like that. You actually can't do anything with it. It runs from 0 to 100. You know, pardon the language, but if you suck, it's going to be less than 50, right? And you know, as you get closer to 100, you're going to be, it's pretty good, but it gives you a sense of rough quartiles. It's not until you break into the components that you start getting a handle on it, right? So we like to say, hey, this isn't about how many people are happy at work or how many people are satisfied. In fact, in full disclosure, we have a JV with Gallup. And I think, you know, engagement's fine, right? I always quibble with those guys about whether or not I need to want to have a brother at work or a best friend at work, but okay, that's part of the Q12. We think this is a little bit more about, is it working on how you set direction? Do people actually get where the company's going? Does it impact their daily work? Do they know what they're on the hook for? The corollary, do they actually have enough authority to do anything about it? That little split, by the way, if you're looking for little insights, getting people to say they can tell you exactly what they're on the hook for and being just as clear about what their authority levels are, critical to actually driving performance. So again, in the world of search, it might be useful to understand the people that you're talking to what extent they're comfortable with not having absolute authority. How many times have you placed people in a matrix or a quasi-matrix and they flame out spectacularly? Because at the last place, they were able to control everything. They had their own HR person, their own finance person, their own contract and procurement person, their own IT guy who bought them whatever ridiculous thing they wanted, right? And then when forced in particularly larger institutions that are going for scale in different ways, and they have some version of the matrix, and now they have to collaborate, and they have to influence, and they can't actually just dictate, and they flame out, right? I mean, I'm certain that's not uncommon, right? My point about this is maybe we can be a little bit more informed about the environment we're putting them into and what their skills are and similar, right? I mean, look, psychometrics are going to get you far, right? Whether you're a Hoganite or you just like a different version of the Big Five, that's fine. But it is good to know whether or not people have an orientation for ambiguity, whether or not they, whether frankly they freak out when things go wrong, right? Whether or not they get energy from, if you get energy from seeing people, maybe going on world tours is important, particularly if you're in a distributed network. If you find another town hall exacerbating, you may not be well suited to that. Right? Just throwing it out there. Okay. By the way, I love selection. My time in the PhD program at Auburn, there was a guy there named Junior Field who wrote a textbook, Gatewood and Field, that for a period of time in grad school was like the best-selling selection textbook. And the science behind selection is spectacular. It really is great. So I do love the part of what you do that's science-based. The part that's kind of soothsaying and weighing your hands and somebody just wanting to run an unstructured interview, maybe not so much. Right? Not that anyone ever does that, right? None of the people you're working with ever just want to meet someone, right? Don't want instruments, that never happens? Okay. And I've been clearly going to the wrong interviews. All right. So this idea of how do we get past how you run the place and break that down into what's the types. So we've been running this instrument now, and let's say we're at 2007, 2008. So I don't know, maybe we have about 750,000 respondents at that point. And my colleagues say, hey, what's the pattern? What's the secret sauce? Again, the Germans really wanting to know what the Excel spreadsheet is so we can just tell people what success is. They love Excel. Anyway, I know I'm going to get shtick tomorrow from some of you who are texting my colleagues saying, who is this asshole you sent to this convention? Anyway, so we looked at those 9 boxes. Remember those things like direction, accountability, the early thing I showed you, the basic levels of health. We couldn't find any patterns. There was just 2, and they were companies that were healthy and companies that weren't. One of the things that became clear was your clients and ours really don't want to pay for someone to show up and say the deep insight is don't be unhealthy. Right? That actually isn't all that helpful or actionable. But what they are interested in is the simple question of what do you do, right? So we measure what we call management practices, 37 of them. It's a lot. I mean, the instrument's huge. At one point it was 250 questions when we were proving it. Then we cut it down to like 150. Now it's just under 100, but it's still big, right? It's not a Q12 or something. We measure a lot of stuff, how you set different ways to set direction. Like for some leaders, they're vision people, right? Anyone here from HBS? Sorry. The stereotypical HBS person, right? Big on the vision and the long game. The stereotypical Wharton person, a little more grounded maybe in analytics, likes the plan, right? What's the plan, the details, the goals, the KPIs. Others, let's say maybe from outside the US, are far more interested in the consensus orientation of how do I involve people on the way of setting the direction. All three of them work. Very rarely do they all show up at the same time, but it would be useful to know which one works in the company and which one they have a predisposition to do or not, right? So we measured that kind of stuff. Setting accountability. Do you use role clarity, right? Do you take time to spell out what I'm asking you to do, what good looks like, when it's got to be done, what you can actually say yes to without talking to me, and who you got to work with? Now, how many of you have worked on things, maybe even in search, where the person says, no, not that client, another one, bring me another one, or just even in your own firms where it seems like it's not that rock, bring me a different one, you know, and the endless churns of decks and proposals and presentations. It is astonishing the amount of time and frustration it's created because we don't actually establish role clarity before we ask people to do work. And this is going to dovetail later when I talk about the impact of automation and platforms, but anchoring back on something as simple as role clarity, critical to people's success early days in a job. What am I actually being asked to do? Now, we've masked over a lot of that by saying, well, candidates have to be comfortable with ambiguity. Sure. And sometimes in the outside market, there is real ambiguity. What's the competitor going to do? What are the macroeconomic forces going to do? But sometimes it would be nice to know if you had a fighting chance at all to be successful by having basic role clarity, right? The others, the comp conversation that was up here before. It's great to get into comp. Probably good to write down what good looks like in terms of actual numbers. What are the thresholds? You know, I have a fair number of clients whose annual budgeting exercises tends to run from December to June when the targets are set in July, confirmed in September, only to be reported on in November. That's not particularly effective, right? Another way, one of which my firm takes a great deal of use of, is consequence management. In this sense, it means consequences up and down, differentiation, right? Those that do well get a lion's share of the rewards, get accelerated faster, promoted more, right, pass through, get a higher bump in pay, and those that do not eventually leave. You know, now, we McKinsey, fullness of disclosure, when we're getting it right, we probably exit somewhere between 18 to 20% of the firm each year. When we're getting it wrong, we're hemorrhaging talent, and then we have to scurry and try to do something different on the recruiting front, right? So it's a fine balance, right? As I'm sure those of you are feeling right now in the superheated world of young executives, we're fighting the battle right now, no doubt about it, right? For folks that can move, have a lot of options. So it presents an interesting challenge to our pyramid, frankly. Okay, so what was the point of all that? Why did I digress on that? Because we just went through maybe 7 or 8 different ways of doing things that you wouldn't do all of them, right? You probably pick some here or there and then put them together. So that was the point of these recipes. How do these things, there's 37 of them in total, how do they all come together? So there's 4 basic. And I'm going to describe these almost like they're Myers-Briggs. Everyone familiar with that? Okay. For whatever you believe of the Please Understand Me book or literature or whatever. Okay, whatever. It's a basic typology of types, right? Interestingly enough, companies do seem to follow this approach of typologies. I'm going to describe 4. Let me just say this in advance. Every company that's there to make money, okay? So I'm talking about for-profits now. They all know they need leaders, right? They all get that. They have to sell something, product, service, whatever, that someone actually wants to buy. They all know they actually have to execute the plan at which they've laid out, and they all know that there's probably some rare talent that's hard to find or get a hold of. Everyone who's in business does that. Where you spend your incremental time, your extraordinary time, what's signature to you is going to vary. Now I'll get into the 4 types, okay? First one, academy company. This is basically classic GE, Crotonville era. They hire Steve Kerr away. They build Crotonville. I guess Noel Tishy was involved a little bit, but Steve Kerr is in my academic tree, and so I will, you know, pump him more. But the point is, academy companies, P&G, Royal Dutch Shell, in its heyday with the international cadre before they decided that expats were really too expensive. Yes, they are, particularly American ones. But these academy companies buy more than they need, right? They promote on time. They don't promote on business need. And they do a few things that are pretty straightforward, which is they get a really clear view of, here's the game plan that you're going to take around the world, right? We have a playbook. We have clear values. We're going to bake into you the idea that once you put the badge on, you have an obligation to us. You're reasonably homogenous. You don't tolerate bad behavior. And you hold each other to a high account for performance. General managers are king in this model. right? Particularly those with strong commercial backgrounds, right? Disaggregated P&Ls. In the old parlance, right? Find the popcorn stand early for someone to run, whereas if they blow it up and it doesn't impact the overall statement, but it gives you an early sign of whether or not they can run anything. Right? Okay, that's what this one does. The flywheel here is general managers that you deploy. You have a problem, you have a must-win market. I was, chatting with Sandy Ogg the other day. Many of you will know him. And back in his Unilever days, and they'd say it wasn't just we had to win detergent. We had to win detergent in India in this segment. That's like great. That's a job that by structure is 5 levels down, but importance you end up dropping an A in there because that's the kind of company you are. That sort of thinking, right? Okay, next one, market shaper. These are companies that by and large say, we're going to create markets and create places to compete that no one else has even thought of yet. We're going to pick and choose where we compete. So there's a creativity component of this, right? A creativity component that says we're going to constantly be looking outside. We're going to find relationships between technologies and services and needs that nobody else is seeing. We're going to really know what our competitors can do and can't do. And these are folks that have a great uncanny knack to jump in somewhere and know it's defensible because the other people are playing catch up. Second, they have amazing commercial acumen in the sense of what it really costs to serve, pocket margin. Right? So you can have a few small people really tuned into the competitive environment and the commercial environment, as well as the underlying finances. So you have clever people coming up with cool stuff that you can sell and defend. And the minute it goes south, or the margins aren't what you like, you get out. Apple is an interesting comparison of both where this model works and doesn't. Apple Jobs version 1 is what? Cool products, just off. Like the first Mac, not enough memory. Stupidly expensive, but cool. People wanted it, right? You had a couple of those products and then a couple of failures, and then what? Scully comes. Scully's basically there with his background from CPG, marketing, commercial discipline, right? Okay, then the thing goes south, right? By the time Emilio is there, they're opening it up to cloning. They're really putting out products that don't work, and they have a Hail Mary. It's great, but it's a Hail Mary. Buying next is the kernel of iOS. Right? Cool stuff comes with it. Then in successive order, what do we get? The iMac. That was a great little machine though, wasn't it? The iMac, the iPhone, the iPod, the iPad, all of those things right in successive order. Now what do we have? Still great products that are better, that other people have a hard time copying, charging premium prices, right? The defensibility of this particular recipe is incredibly hard. The kind of leaders you need to have here that straddle the fence of unbelievable insight into cool product dev versus staying grounded in are we going to make money, right? Very difficult. Okay, third one, and where the bulk of the companies, by the way, in our database are. As an aside, all of you taking this photo right now, and while it's great, I really do feel like a rock star. There's a spectacular article, because I wrote it, on McKinsey Quarterly called The Hidden Value of Organization, where all of this is there, and we can send it to you, okay? But if you want to keep taking pictures of this snappy tie, go ahead. I'm going to turn sideways, though, because I don't think profile this is working very well. Okay, so continuous improvement. This is the bulk of the companies, and I suspect the bulk of the companies that you are working with, where basically what they do is heavily competed. Other people do it. Very few things anymore. When was the last time you really served somebody who did something nobody else does? It's really rare, right? Most of the time, it's you got to out-hustle, out-execute, out-compete, out-serve. In this case, the flywheel here is frontline leaders and frontline employees. People who do the work. Now, frontline does not have to be, carrying tools. It could be engineers, right? I serve a tech play on the West Coast that lots of you will know, and in the past, their model was go find what we need, buy it, and roll it up. And that's great when you continue having market dominance wherever you are and people want to buy boxes and blades. If then someday you wake up and say, oh, actually, people want services now, and they want our stuff knitted together, and they'd like an agreement that how it's going to work and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's a little bit of a different deal. Now your frontline employees are incredibly high-priced, difficult to find engineers who probably haven't been working for you, right? So it's a different challenge. So in this case, this is around things like, let's stoke the fires of competition. And there's going to be a hedge on this because it may seem a little counterintuitive. That internally competitive means brutally transparent about your performance. Let everyone in the place know how you're performing. League tables. Anyone here familiar with English football? Premiership. Okay, right. Not American football, English football. Okay. The best competition is at the bottom of the table, not at the top of the table. Because the bottom 4 teams, I think, or whatever, get sent down, relegated, right? Being anywhere near that is an amazing source of energy sometimes positive, sometimes negative for both the fans and the club. What we're trying to get at here is, for most competitive professionals, the thought of being anywhere near the bottom of a table in anything, survey response rate, completion of mandatory courses, just having people turn their badges in on time, whatever, it doesn't matter. Being on the bottom of the table is motivating, because many of them have been told they've been special their entire life, right? Now they're at the bottom. And we should use that, right? It's a nice, natural, ostensibly, you profiled them for some semblance of work achievement, right? So this works with those people. They don't like being on the bottom. Okay, a couple other things. They also want to feel like they were involved in setting the course, that employee involvement one there. Remember, this is one of those ways of setting direction where they said, hey, we don't want to just dictate it from the top. We'd actually like to know why the hell it is we're doing what we're doing, right? Why are you asking me to build this, right? How does that come together, okay? That one there. Moving down here through other things that you'd expect to see, like in a lean environment, right? So we have visual management, right? You're looking outside for good ideas, you're copying quickly, sharing broadly and widely. This one, by the way, knowledge sharing, huge issue the larger the company gets. Right? How many of your clients and my clients struggle with silos? Right? Now, it's almost de rigueur, right? I mean, like, oh, yes, silos, the matrix must be bad. Well, okay. Except that the Sloan model of organization tends to be shockingly expensive, and most can't afford that anymore, where you can just say, okay, don't worry about talking to anyone, right? Go do your own thing. That doesn't work, right? So now it needs to be, if somebody knows it, you need to make sure everybody knows it. So people who naturally, and this is a mindset point that I'm sure we can select on, people who can naturally have a desire to win, but want the enterprise to win more. So they don't sandbag, right? Lots and lots and lots of clients struggle with the cult of personality internal is such that I'm in the know, I'm the one who has the relationships, I have this, so they have to come through me as opposed to sharing broadly. You've got to figure that we have a way to get ahead of that up front and understanding and articulating their previous relationships to know whether or not they are a holder in and an optimizer for themselves or an optimizer for others. Right? Internally, we McKinsey have been modeling this sort of stuff in our own people analytics group. It's a little group I lead for the firm, which is just trying to model what real performance looks like as opposed to the Lake Wobegon, everyone's a 4 on 5. Right? Not that any of you have ever seen that, but believe it or not, most performance ratings are useless. Right, because they're too concentrated. You don't have enough variance. You can't actually predict anything when everyone's a 4. The people you're going to fire are 1. Nobody's really a 2 or a 3. Everyone's a 4, and a few people who actually do walk on water are a 5. Right? You need more spread in here. So we've been looking at sort of imputed performance and how you can really tease that out and predict that. Okay, so that's continuous improvement. This one, most companies, the biggest secret sauce here is growing leaders deeper in the organization. So whereas many of you are focused on executives, the secret sauce here would start at the plant level and down, getting people a little earlier and getting them involved, not necessarily going, basically it buys into the idea that the cascade as we know it of messages from upon high is fundamentally broken, because most of the time it is, and it's getting deeper in the organization. Last one, and one that I think you all will both impact your firms, as well as my firm, but a lot of the places you're hiring for, which is professional services. Rare talent, rare air, A types, right? Okay, so let's call out the obvious. These are people who are incredibly bright, have gone to super schools, have likely been told they're the smartest kid in their class their entire life, and the thought of getting anything less than an A is, like a gut shot, right? Anyone see, by the way, this week, the article that came out showing how the aggregate grades at Ivy League institutions have grown over the last 20 years? Anyone see that, right? Yeah, well, it's inflation, right? It is. Let's call it what it is. It's inflation, right? 25 years ago, it was closer to a C. Today, it's about an A. We have spent a ridiculous amount of time inside McKinsey trying to model down to the university how much inflation is there. It is a fruitless exercise. But some things are truism. Princeton does still seem to be closest to calling it as it is, as an aside. So well done to the Princeton grads. But so what's the issue with that? It's a group of folks, and then the guy who was 2 before me. Yeah, okay, great. He was talking about some of the millennial components. Look, there is something to this, right? I mean, there's something about wanting development, but not necessarily wanting to be told that what you just did was useless, right? Or actually, you're not up to snuff, right? I mean, this idea of the high intensity, high involvement workplace while delivering a difficult message, there is an art form here, no doubt about it. So, talent and knowledge core. They got to believe that they have opportunities for them. Interesting twist, not the lifetime Shell or other places where you get your currently estimated potential and it says 10 moves from now you'll be 1 away from the CEO. More like in the next 18 months, what am I going to do? Which again does harken back to project work, right? There's something here under a lot of these where project work is going to keep coming up. We're going to come to this in a second. The other thing, things like reward and recognition. Yes, people who are super clever would like to be paid. Every paycheck normalizes after about the third one, at which point, even if it was a raise, you convince yourself you deserved it all along anyway. Now, while I do have a German last name, and I am a PhD in this, I can assure you 70 years ago, much better German PhDs were telling us this about the value of money as a motivator. It's just limited. There's a way of keeping score. There's no doubt about it. I get it. And high-priced people want to keep score. There's a relativism to that. The nature of the work, whether or not you're getting feedback, whether or not you're being told when you do well, whether or not you know what it is you're actually being asked to do matters way more. Okay, way more. Anyway, that's unique for this talent, hard to find. You are constantly facing this challenge. Now, I've got the 5-minute mark, and I wanted to plug one thing here for you. This automation stuff. Again, if you're interested in this at all, we've just put a bunch of this stuff out on the quarterly website and McKinsey Global Institute, and we showcased it in Davos this year. This is some pretty interesting stuff, and one that I do think will impact you. The automation of work, as we know it to this point, we tend to think about factories, right? It's a relatively small portion of the American workforce that is going to be faced with complete automation of their roles, probably about 5%. But when we look more broadly, at least 30% is going to have portions of their work done. And this is what's interesting. We were trying to do it on the job level, and that's how we ended up with the 5%. When we went to the task level and going to like Department of Labor kind of stuff, went down one level, then it became very interesting. Doctors, surgeons, radiologists, people who read MRIs, lawyers, doc reading, doc preparing, right? All the sorts of things that historically have been protected roles are exposed to this. And if it were not for some societal things around type 1 and type 2 error, we'd likely be doing more of it, frankly. But very quickly, I think we're going to see an increased erosion of this. So what does it do to the fabric of work if now portions of your job are being automated or done out? And our belief is it's going to take us from thinking about jobs to thinking about individuals as collections of skills and activities that can be done. And if that's the case, now it's not the individual with the resume. It's the individual with the sheet that says what they can do. And we're back to project work. The compilation of people who can do different skills and put together, much like, pardon the sports metaphor, much like a GM of a football team. You only need 2 stars. Then you need like 10 people who are really pretty good. Then you need about 20 who are just okay at a particular task, but that's all you ask them to do anyway because that's the offense or defense you run. Bolting people together for a period of time, and then what happens when you don't need them anymore? They're gone. They're gone. So this idea of a platform, you are market makers uniquely in what you do. LinkedIn, thing we were trying about before, trying to be a market for, let's say, lower down the organization, incomplete and still decidedly in the favor of the employer, not the employee. We have a big JV with them looking at this. It's very interesting stuff. You know, the idea that every person on the planet would have one of these, but it's a collection, what? It's your dossier. What can you do? So if you get to the point of where this automation is, how do jobs get reformed? Now, your role, and while we come back to it, is what can they do? What have they done? What are they comfortable with? And what's the situation you're putting them into? The reason I led, and I'm 1 minute away here, the reason I led with all that health stuff, I'm convinced that the companies that are going to do best will know themselves the best. They'll know what they're trying to be, what recipe they're picking, dramatically increasing the likelihood that they can help you to help them find people who can thrive in that environment. No one wants to be the mismatched person where you show up thinking you're running talent and knowledge core with A players, and you show up and actually it's a bunch of soothsayers who want to, sort of run their own castle like a fiefdom. That doesn't work, right? So in closing here, my point about this was, one, to expose you a little bit to our thinking, but 2, to say, keep calling me. I'm always looking. Anyway, no, sorry, that was for later over drinks. But it's to say, really, your role here is incredibly unique, and I think at the opportunity, companies are going to lag in their capacity to really understand the market-making component of it. Not the Marquette, the market-making. Your capacity to really be able to see in on both the person but the activity or skill level, I think, is unique, right? I do think it needs to be augmented with more analytics, right? And not just psychometrics, like good analytics, actually understanding performance. I think that's an opportunity for the whole sector. But again, right, it's healthy companies make more money. The easiest way to be healthy is to pick a recipe and be it, right? The best way to pick a recipe is figure out what your strategy is, what you have and what you want to be. And your role here, uniquely, is finding people who can thrive in that environment, right? And lower, I mean, I don't know what your watch, I'm sure that you have the published success rate and then you have the behind closed doors success rate. Our transitions work shows that the failure rate of people from the outside, from the inside is like 3x. Right? It's like, you know, it's just a much higher beta. You may get a higher upside, but it's a much higher beta placement. So thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. And I look forward to our panel here. Thank you.